Hey guys, this is Paul Lynch. I'm an anesthesiologist and pain management doctor from Scottsdale, Arizona. Many of you guys have followed my videos this summer after I went and worked in New York City and contracted COVID myself. I continue to make weekly videos. I think it's an easy way for me to kind of help during this crisis, and hopefully this has been educational for you guys. This week I want to take on the topic of how to open our churches safely. A couple weeks ago I talked about how can we open our schools safely. And I think some of you watched that video. I will say many people have reached out to me and told me afterwards that my video was great and I gave a lot of good common sense advice, but their kids are going back to school and they're not following this advice. I would just recommend that if you're a parent to a child and you don't think your school is following the advice, or if you're a teacher, you have to be an advocate for safety. We should not be just blindly opening schools or blindly hurtling towards this. It only makes sense to open your area if the positivity rate is low enough, if we're setting up social distancing guidelines, if we're wearing masks. If that's not happening, I think you got to continue to push back because this disease is real and we should not, act like it's not going to hurt children. That's not the point of today's video. I want to talk about churches, and I'll just give the same guidance. We can open our churches, but we have to do it safely. We have to follow guidelines so that we protect the most vulnerable during this time. It's the Christian thing to do. So I want to give 4 high-level concepts, and then I'm going to jump into maybe like what it would be like walking through a Sunday morning at your church in a safe manner. And I'm going to, as usual, attach lots of references so you can kind of read primary sources on how to do this. So now 4 high-level concepts. I've been teaching 4 things. The CDC's kind of changed their teaching just a little bit, I think, to kind of educate us better. So they're saying the 4 things right now would be: number 1, wear a mask, nothing different there. Number 2, wash your hands, that's right. Number 3, my brain's not working. Number 3, socially distance. The number 4 for the CDC right now is they're actually saying avoid crowds. Before I would teach number 4 is screen, test, and track. But I'm actually going to take the CDC's guidance here and say avoid crowds. Now, you may say socially distancing and avoiding crowds are the same thing, and they kind of are. But I really like it that the CDC is focusing this concept of avoiding large groups. That seems to be where this transmission is occurring, is when there's large groups of people together and it spreads kind of quickly. And so I'll just repeat those things: wear a mask, wash your hands, socially distance, and avoid large crowds or congregating in groups. And so that kind of affects us when we're trying to go back to church. I think we should go back to church. As a matter of fact, in Arizona, we list church as an essential activity that we should be doing, but we need to do it safely. So let me just kind of walk through what I would recommend. I'm going to actually put a couple of links, and one of them is a document that my pastor wrote on how we're going to reopen our church. And he was nice enough to reach out to me, and so I kind of helped him a little bit with a document, but it's really his document. But I read through it and I really like it. I like his approach and how he kind of laid it out. I'm also going to attach a document from the Family Research Council on how they did churches, and then I'm gonna attach documents from the CDC and even the Arizona State Department of Health. And so you guys can kind of see multiple different documents from either churches or state governments on how we can do this safely. What you're gonna find is everyone's kind of saying the same thing, which is we can do this, but we need to do it intelligently and safely. Now, there are some people that are fighting against this and think that we should open with no mask and no precautions. And I think those voices are fairly fringe. I don't think we should get too caught up in the people that are arguing against this. I think it's a very small group of people. As I've researched and looked around at different denominations around the country, I'm finding most churches are saying the same thing. So I don't think anything that I'm presenting today is controversial. If you think it is, it might just be that sometimes the fringe voices are the loudest and we hear them, but it doesn't seem to be what most people are saying. Let me walk you through me going to church this Sunday and what I expect to see. So first, I think instead of having 2 services on a Sunday morning, your church should consider maybe having like 4 or 5. If let's say you have 200 people that want to go to church in 2 services, that's 100 in each service. But what if you had 5? Now it's only 40 people. You've cut it down significantly. And so first of all, I would recommend at your church that you expand the services. And you're going to kill your pastors. If you expect an hour and a half service times 4, you're going to wear them out. And so maybe get comfortable with the concept of shorter services, but more of them. So a lot of churches have 2 services on Sunday. So I've been recommending maybe 4 services on Sunday morning and 1 on Saturday night, and then to spread your congregation throughout those services. Number 2, I think a really healthy message to your members, not to feel guilty about missing service. I think a lot of us that have grown up in church, we feel like every time the doors are open, we should be there. But this is a time to exercise caution. And so in the document that I'm going to attach below, my pastor does a really good job of telling people, don't feel like you have to be here. God sees you at home. You have a relationship with God no matter where you're at. And so I think it's important for us as church leaders to tell the people, you don't have to be here when the doors are open. So as I'm parking my car and I'm walking up, normally there's greeters and we're shaking hands. We're not going to recommend shaking hands in this environment. I'll probably see greeters at the door wearing masks, right? Normally they would have handed me a bulletin. We're not going to hand out bulletins in this environment. It doesn't make sense to be touching things that other people have touched. Probably the first thing we should notice in a really well-run church service in this COVID environment is social distancing. One good idea is to have families sit together. So a mom and a dad and kids, they can all sit together and hold hands and touch. That's what's going on at home anyways. But to spread families out. So in the example I gave before, if you had, and I know some of your churches are larger, and so you'll need to work it out for yourself. But if you had 100 people in the service or in the sanctuary before, maybe there's only 25 or 30 or maybe 40, but probably not much bigger than that in the example that I'm giving. And then maybe it's the families are sitting together. 6 feet is not a perfect number. I would spread out as much as you possibly can. So at least for my church, I recommended instead of having 100 or 150 people in the sanctuary, maybe it's 40 or 50, and they've spread out maybe into 8 to 10 separate families that honestly separate as much as they possibly can, so that we're not spreading COVID. Certainly everyone should be wearing masks, not just the pastor and the greeters, but every person that comes into the church should wear a mask. And then before we had like hymnals that we would touch and pens and paper, and we'd pass offering plates. All those things should kind of go away. There shouldn't be things that we're touching that someone else should touch. We love to sing in church, right? There's choirs and we sing songs and we worship. And I think a lot of the singing needs to take a back seat for now. And this is going to bother some people. I think people are going to struggle with this. I just think it needs to take a back seat. I think we can listen to music. I think we can still play worship music and we can celebrate and worship God. But I think the concept of like a choir and singing, all it's going to do is spread virus around a room that doesn't make sense. So I would recommend listening to music and maybe humming. Humming doesn't spread as much, and this has been recommendations from multiple leaders that have been looking at churches. I think a shorter service, as we talked about, so that we can do more. And then when we leave, making plenty of time to clean up behind. So sanitizing and washing things down. We shouldn't be touching hymnals and then other people touching. So it should just be the seats around where someone's going to sit. I think a really healthy message to our members would be, if they're 65 and older, if they have heart disease or lung disease or obesity or diabetes, they just probably not come to church. And I think it needs to come from the pastor to tell them, you don't need to be here. I'd rather you just stay at home right now, because we would feel so terrible as church members if we encouraged everyone to come back and act like this isn't, happening. If someone got sick and died, that would just be such a tough thing. Working with my own pastor over the last couple of months, we polled our church. And one of the things that really struck me was 70% of our church said they trusted our pastor to do what was right. That really strikes me as a leader, is we think about, as leaders, the responsibility that God has given us to others that look up to us. I think about this every day with my kids, or as a doctor, that, it's a great responsibility to be a leader. And I think my pastor has really taken that seriously this summer, that 70% of the people in our church have looked to him and said, I trust you to make the right decision. I'm going to attach his document that he wrote, which I got to tell you, I trust is the right decision. I think he's doing the right thing for our congregation. But I would just encourage all Christian leaders out there, if you're watching this, if you're thinking about what to do for your church, the people in your church trust you. And I think God's given you that responsibility for a reason. So I just kind of admonish all leaders everywhere that we take our responsibility seriously. And so that's all I wanted to say about how to reopen churches. I'm going to, as usual, put documents below so you can reference it. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. God bless you guys. Stay safe, and God bless America. And have a great time going back to church.